China said on Tuesday that the U.S. and Canada have abused their extradition agreement in the case of an arrested Huawei executive after a Canadian diplomat told the press that the U.S. will go ahead with a formal extradition request. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson Hua Chunying made the comments at a regular briefing on Tuesday and again called for Meng Wanzhou to be immediately released. Meng is the daughter of the founder of Huawei. She was arrested last month while transiting through Vancouver by Canadian authorities on behalf of the U.S. Justice Department, which is pursuing her for fraud. She has been on bail since December the 11th, pending the U.S.'s decision on whether or not to extradite her before a deadline of January the 30th. Is this a done deal that the U.S. will formally go ahead with the extradition request? Why is the U.S. adamant in seeking her extradition despite China's strong protest? What does it mean for Canada if the U.S. formally goes ahead with the request? Joining me for the discussion in the Beijing studio are Victor Gao, Global Counselor of Asia Society, and Harvey Zoding, Research Fellow for the Center for China and Globalization. Before we start the discussion, let's first listen to what the spokesperson of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hua Chunying, said during a Tuesday press briefing.
Canada and the United States have abused their extradition agreement, threatened the Chinese citizen's safety, and violated her legitimate rights. We call for immediate release of Meng Wanzhou. We also urge the U.S. to revoke the arrest and stop proceeding with formal extradition.
Okay, let's start with the discussion, and welcome to the point, by the way. Let me ask you, Victor, how do you look at the way the story broke? I mean, it was the Canadian ambassador to the United States who talked to a Canadian newspaper and said that the U.S. will go ahead with the extradition request. What do you make of the method, how the information was released, and the timing of it? We are about a week away from the deadline. What do you think of it?
Thank you for having me. First of all, the whole situation involving Madam Meng Wanzhou is more or less a story of three countries: China and Canada and the United States, and China and the United States. Now, I think China's effort up to now has been very much focused on relations between China and Canada. Of course, China-Canadian relations have been very important, and many of us here in China consider many friends in Canada as our very good friends, and the two countries really highly complement each other. However, the recent deterioration of relations between China and Canada is very much triggered by what the Canadian government did, and there is high level of indignation in China among the Chinese government, among the Chinese people, and I think right now the Canadian authorities have indicated that they understand the U.S. side will follow up with their request for the extradition of Madam Meng Wanzhou to the United States for trial, for example. And I think now, only up to now, China has also pointed the finger at the United States, basically say, you need to drop this request. You should not really proceed with the requesting of the Canadians to extradite Meng Wanzhou to the United States. So I think China need to deal with Canada on the one hand, and now, from now, especially when the request really becomes true, also at the United States. So China need to handle both Canada and the United States at the time. Now, it's very bad for China-Canadian relations. Relations will definitely suffer more damage and being poisoned if Madam Meng Wanzhou is extradited to the United States. But then, once the United States has the custody of Madam Meng Wanzhou, China-U.S. relations will suffer in its turn. It's very unfortunate and very regrettable. I would call the whole handling of the Huawei situation and Madam Meng Wanzhou situation as political persecution by the United States of a commercial company and of an innocent person.
At this moment, if the U.S. officially goes ahead with the extradition request, Ms. Meng Wanzhou still has some hope because a Canadian judge will rule on the extradition request and decide whether or not to hand her over to the U.S. authorities. So her fate is still unknown at this moment. But Harvey, Harvey, what do you make of the timing and again the method how this information was released? Do you think there is some kind of message, some kind of hope that the Canadian side probably hopes that the Chinese can work on it so that the U.S. stops the extradition request?
Yeah, of course. China has been very strident to Canada, and I think Canada, in some ways, is the country in the middle, and it's feeling the heat and shouldn't. It should be between the U.S. And China. Canada is just following what 100 other countries follow, this extradition treaty, and it's a lengthy process that's only just beginning, because the U.S. has until the end of this month to file a formal request for extradition, and then there's a hearing probably in early February, and at that point a judge in Canada has to determine whether there's a probable cause that she committed the crime that the Americans are accusing her of. Then it goes to the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice, and there's a number of other appeals built into the process. So this could be a 6-month or more process while this unravels or is dealt with in some other way.
It's probably not necessary in the first place. I mean, whether or not Canada has to follow very literally the extradition agreement between Canada and the United States is a big question. That's why some people are suspecting this is very much a political issue instead of just a judicial case. Nevertheless,
it may be, and that's why Prime Minister Trudeau may have the last say on this from the Canadian perspective, and that's completely a political decision, and he might make it.
And from what the U.S. President Donald Trump has said about, you know, the possibility of intervene if it is useful for the trade deal between China and the United States, it's even more so. It sounds even more so. Anyway, what does this planned request of extradition say about the U.S.'s intention to do with the company Huawei? Victor?
I think what the United States has been doing against Huawei is the political persecution of a commercial company. Now, you may like what Huawei does or doesn't do as a commercial company. You may like their product or services or don't. That's another issue. However, to rise up to such a political level, as if they see Huawei as the devil, whereas in reality, Huawei is a very outstanding company, a provider of backbone services for the 5G networks, for example, in many countries in the world, as well as 4G and also mobile telephone sets, for example. And I think the United States is going to such great lengths to become very politically motivated against a Chinese company. And this really is very, very bad for the United States, because if the United States can do this to Huawei, other countries can do similar things to many American companies. And the fact that China is not doing that doesn't mean China cannot do that. So this will be really tearing the business communities apart. Many companies will die because of this kind of manhandling of commercial companies.
And the U.S. is very much aware of the strong position China has expressed, right? China is opposed to this, and China has warned to the U.S. that don't do this, correct your mistake, otherwise China will take action. Why is the U.S. willing to risk further consequences and putting bilateral relations or trilateral relations in further constraint?
I think that there's a feeling in Washington, and it's spreading, that China is a kind of enemy or devil that needs to be dealt with. And if you look back in Chinese history, the one thing that China, as a new China or old China in its many iterations, did not like and felt most threatened by was being encircled. And I think by this action against Huawei, China is being economically encircled, if not politically, and not only by the United States, by many other countries that have said no, they're not going to take Huawei's 5G equipment. So I think they're going after the crown jewel and making a point against this company and using it as kind of a stalking horse for many other Chinese companies and for China itself.
Yeah, in Chinese we have 杀鸡给猴看, right? Kill the chicken or the hen and show it to the monkeys, don't follow suit. Huawei, however, has been quite calm. On Tuesday, the company reacted to the news, saying the company complies with all applicable laws and regulations in the countries and regions where we operate, including export control and sanctions laws of the UN, the US and the EU. We have every confidence that the Canadian and US legal systems will reach a just conclusion. Victor, how do you look at Huawei's reaction so far?
I personally think Huawei is an outstanding company, and it handles the situation this time as well as in previous occasions very calmly. And I think it's very admirable for them to do this. And especially when Chairman Ren Zhengfei's daughter, Ms. Meng Wanzhou, has been arrested by the Canadians. And I do hope this will reflect well, not only here in China, about the quality of the company of Huawei, but also will teach the Western countries what this company is really all about. It's about quality, it's about efficiency, it's about reliability, and it's a leading company in 5G. Now, if the United States and several other Western countries decide not to use Huawei equipment for the 5G, who will lose? The United States will eventually lose. What they get is not the 5G network itself. It's 4.5 plus something, for example. So eventually, you not only lose out on the 5G network, but also all the corresponding applications attached to the 5G. So the United States will suffer double losses eventually if they do not handle the situation well.
Yeah, and let's also think about the potential consequences of this extradition. The United States is not thinking of 5 or 10 years of imprisonment or some kind of fine and would let Meng Wanzhou go. What they're asking is 30 years of imprisonment for each account, for each crime she's accused of committing, so she could the poor lady could spend a few decades in jail if she's really convicted and handed over to the United States. However, her father, Ren Zhengfei, has also been quite composed. Earlier in an interview with CCTV, he said that since Meng's arrest and release on bail, he has talked to her on phone and shared some jokes even. He is not too much worried about her, but thinks she will need a long time to solve the problem. We don't know what that long time means. And this whole situation will be resolved through legal means, and that we are confident it can be resolved. Harvey, what do you think of his composure, knowing that her daughter might end up in jail in the United States?
I think it's absolutely exemplary. And I contrast that with the kind of shrill response of the Chinese government. I think China has a right to be angry, but I think the way they're going about it, and in a very loud manner and a threatening manner as well, is not as effective as what Huawei is doing and the manner in which Huawei is proceeding.
Okay, you're actually speaking the mind of some Western politicians or Western scholars or commentators who have said that, look, China's reaction so far has actually the potential of damaging China's political capitals abroad and, could backlash on China. Victor, what do you think of China's approach so far? Does China have an alternative to this?
No, I don't think so. I think Chinese government need to do whatever it can to protect its nationals. In this particular case, Ms. Meng Wanzhou. And the United States asked the Canadian authority to arrest Meng Wanzhou. And from the Chinese perspective, the first one we need to deal with is the Canadian authority, and the second we need to deal with is the United States.
Let me ask you
and we need to do whatever we can to really square this with them.
Yeah, I think many people have it on their mind. Look, time-wise, after Meng Wanzhou's arrest, there are these two Canadians who have been put under coercive measures, as we say in Chinese, and then there is also this Canadian drug dealer who was sentenced to death sentence, a heavier sentence than his first sentence, which was only 15 years in prison. Some people are linking the cases that China has put on these Canadian nationals with the arrest of Meng. How do you explain that? And China, of course, says there is no link, but how do you look at that?
Yes, the Chinese government has already made it clear that there are no links between the arrest of Ms. Meng Wanzhou by the Canadian authorities and the legal situations befalling on the Canadian nationals here in China.
Yeah.
However, I would like to emphasize, philosophically speaking, everything under the sun is connected with each other. So if someone really believes there is no philosophical connection between and among these cases, I would say he or she is indulging in fantasy. There must be a connection. The Canadian authority pulled the trigger on Ms. Meng Wanzhou, and the Chinese government and the people are very angry about it, and there will be consequences. Now, Harvey said maybe China will suffer some diplomatic losses. We don't care. I think the Chinese government is doing the right thing. We need to deal with this very squarely with the Canadian authority, and the Chinese government will win a lot of kudos here in China among the Chinese people when they stand very firm and very fiercely against whichever government in the foreign countries which want to take away the rights of the Chinese national.
Okay, it's indeed a very divisive issue. I believe in the future, in the near future, we're going to have more discussion about that, but we're going to leave it here. Many thanks to Victor Gao, Global Counsel of Asia Society, and Harvey Zoding, a research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization.